Thank you, Linda, for spending decades of your lives researching our history. To all of us here, I cannot recommend it enough. Thank you very much again, Linda. And I will now invite you to join me on the stage so that we can start first with a brief presentation of your book and then a few questions from my side before moving to the Q&A session. So I will just ask you to join me on the stage and take the seat right near me. Welcome, Linda.
Your Excellency, First Lady of Rwanda, I'm honored by your presence today. Diplomats, survivors, Rwandan friends, and friends of Rwanda. The Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide of December 1948 was the world's first human rights treaty, and it stood for a fundamental and important principle. Wherever genocide threatened any group or nation or people, it was a matter of concern, not just for that group, but for the whole of humanity. The Convention was the first truly universal, comprehensive, and codified protection of human rights. And while the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is simply an affirmation, the Genocide Convention is a treaty. Compliance is not a choice, it is an obligation. The Convention enshrines the promise of never again following the Holocaust in Europe, and it was intended to avoid the recurrence of state-sanctioned racist policies directed against specific groups. The Security Council of the UN is entrusted with the application of the Genocide Convention. It is the Council that has the obligation to prevent and suppress the crime. The failure by the Council in 1994 to abide by the Convention is one of the greatest and unrecognized scandals of the 20th century. That the genocide against the Tutsi was allowed to proceed unhindered, accompanied by near universal and deeply troubling indifference, is shameful. The speed, the scale, and the brutality, the failure to intervene when genocide was threatened, and the suppression of information when it was underway, is a shocking indictment of governments and individuals who could have prevented it, but chose not to do so, even when the evidence was indisputable. And while in these past 28 years, debates, studies, and resolutions have condemned the bureaucracies and systems involved, the blame has simply slipped away from those officials and politicians who made decisions that cost an unimaginable number of lives, all the while pretending that nothing could be done. It is extraordinary to recall that on April the 29th, 1994, as thousands of Tutsi were being killed, the Security Council held an 8-hour, sterile, absurd, and meaningless debate on whether to use the word genocide in relation to Rwanda. The UK Ambassador David Haney was scathing. If ambassadors used the word genocide, he said, they would be a laughing stock. For Haney, the victims of genocide lived in the French sphere in Africa. For this reason, their suffering occurred against a backdrop of total official indifference. Indeed, the UK adopted policies that helped facilitate genocide and prolong it. Haney now sits in the House of Lords, dismissing the very suggestion that he was somehow responsible. His inaction made a mockery of the Genocide Convention, and his willful neglect seriously called into question Britain's role as one of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. Another powerful and privileged state was simply indifferent, the US. The US ambassador, Madeleine Albright, who last month was lauded a great stateswoman, had also argued against the use of the word genocide. She claimed later, "It would be weeks before most of us understood the nature and scale of the violence. There was confusion about who was to blame for the killing. This is simply not the case, as declassified US documents later revealed." Albright was happy to blame the UN for the failure over Rwanda, used the organization to camouflage her own apathy. Both the US and the UK insisted on a ceasefire, rather like wanting Hitler to reach a ceasefire with the Jews, as one of the non-permanent council members commented. As for France, intimate with those committing the crime, its ambassador Jean-Bernard Mérimée insisted on moral equivalence and was opposed to condemning only one side. Today, 28 years later, the US and the UK continue to have problems with the word genocide. They are the only 2 members of the entire UN to refuse to comply with the official designation, genocide against the Tutsi. To have provided a UN peacekeeping mission at the outset, and then deny the means and mandate to be a serious guarantor for the Arusha Accords, sent a clear signal that the perpetrators could continue unimpeded with their genocidal conspiracy. The genocide against the Tutsi is a terrible milestone, made worse because the true nature continues to be deliberately distorted and confused. As some of you know, I have been researching and writing about the genocide against the Tutsi since April 1994. Today, I would like to share with you a milestone interview I conducted 25 years ago. In a remarkable and wide-ranging interview with His Excellency Paul Kagame in 1997, I had sat with him in the old Ministry of Defense. He had discussed the Arusha Accords and told me of the assurances he had been given by Western officials and diplomats. Even as the negotiations in Arusha were taking place, an extremist clique of Hutu power ideologues was killing Tutsi civilians, then organized massacres. He was told not to worry. The whole world is watching, he was reassured by Western diplomats. He said he never missed an opportunity to issue warnings and had given information to Lieutenant General Dallaire, telling him the locations where Interahamwe were being trained, and Dallaire had flown overhead, confirming the information. When the genocide of the Tutsi began on April the 7th, His Excellency suggested to Dallaire that the UN and the RPF join forces to stop the killing of civilians. "Don't talk to me about mandate," he told Dallaire. "Just save people." He said, "I told Dallaire to secure some areas, create safe havens, and whoever comes, fight them. You have weapons. You have every right to fight if someone disrespects the flag of the UN." He asked me a question to which I had no answer. Why had the UN sent military forces if not to protect the civilian population? By the second week, the genocide against the Tutsi was obvious, he said. People were flocking to RPF bases with terrible wounds. His troops were finding massacre sites. And then he said the following: "All those in the world who claim to be civilized were turning their backs on us. and I knew that we were alone. And this developed some contempt for people who claim to stand for values which they claim as their moral authority in this world. He went on, I had never seen the world so hopeless and helpless. I reached the stage where I did not want them to come, because it would have been too late and it would not have changed anything. We know that even today, more than a quarter of a century later, and with the wealth of evidence available, many deny this reality. He talked about how the Security Council had succumbed to the demands of the French. He said that the Council had made a deliberately stupid mistake by allowing French intervention. We said we would take them on, he told me. The French were a part of the problem. France was hand in glove with the killers. He said both the French and the Genocide had tried to infer a second genocide had taken place of Hutu, even as the RPF liberated the country. And so it was. The noxious claim of a second genocide in 1994 remains with us today. It is one of the foundation stones of the campaign of denial. It is repeated far and wide, unchecked and unverified by a slew of Western media, academics, lawyers, and politicians. They claim this second genocide was the subject of a massive international cover-up, and yet not one shred of evidence exists of either a second genocide or a cover-up. In 1994, the claim of a second genocide was a smokescreen to distract foreign attention from the genocide against the Tutsi. And the claim is used today by the deniers who seek moral equivalence alongside their attempts to diminish the death toll, to claim the killing was in self-defense and the victims themselves to blame. The deniers want the world to believe that the genocide against the Tutsi is a matter of legitimate debate rather than the historical truth. The deniers claim the world has been fooled by an official story, the result of a financed and brilliantly executed public relations campaign engineered by the Rwandan government. Such nonsense was promoted in 2014 by the BBC in a documentary, Rwanda's Untold Story. And we saw soon after its broadcast how it was widely promoted by the deniers, thrilled that their campaign had been given the legitimacy of the UK's public service broadcaster. While the deniers each have an agenda, they do have one thing in common: a failure to understand the crime. They fail to acknowledge why the RPF fought so hard to liberate Rwanda, seeking an end to racism, hatred, and division, an end to a quota system against a minority, an imposition of identity cards bearing an ethnic designation. Before the RPF liberation of Rwanda, there had existed an odious apartheid regime like that established in South Africa. The quota system was used to restrict the presence of Tutsi in education and employment, and it served to reinforce a racist ideology that two distinct ethnic groups existed. This is exactly how genocide begins, with an absurdist racist ideology that is spread via atrocity speech, using vile rhetoric and incitement to murder. It ensures the target group suffers discrimination, exclusion, marginalization, brutality, fear, terror, and death. In a harsh rebuke after the genocide was over, an international inquiry concluded that the Western press, in characterizing the genocide as tribal anarchy, was fundamentally irresponsible. The media's failure to report that genocide was taking place and thereby generate public pressure for something to be done to stop it contributed to the international indifference and inaction, and to the crime itself. There are parts of the Western press that continue today to distort events. The deniers include journalists who have hidden agendas and secret backers who use misleading versions of history to smear Rwanda, to try to stop foreign aid, use fake news to try to weaken the Rwandan government. These journalists see no need to check facts, no need to conform with the principles of integrity key to the practice of journalism. To accuse a serving president of assassinating his predecessor by firing missiles at his jet would obviously require a mass of evidence, and yet no evidence exists. Instead, scientific reports are ignored, all verified evidence dismissed, and journalists rely for this accusation on a few corrupt and pathetic exiles and a discredited dossier from a French magistrate. It would be unthinkable to accuse a Western leader of such a crime with no evidence. And it is abundantly clear that one set of journalistic rules exist when reporting events in the West, and another set entirely is used when reporting Africa, when reporting Rwanda. The denial of the genocide against the Tutsi causes the gravest offense to survivors. It denies the dignity of the deceased, and it mocks those who survived. For the survivors, the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi is not an event to be commemorated once a year, but it is something that they live with every single day in grief, pain, and anger. Denial ensures that genocide is a crime with no end.
So thank you very much for your presentation. A lot comes to mind after hearing you and after reading the book, but I just wanted to engage you on a few points as we open the conversation to the audience. So first of all, your book goes deep in tracking and describing the nature of the denial of the genocide against the Tutsi, and it brilliantly presents the facts. And in that, your book is really also a powerful reference for the current fight against the genocide denial we are conducting. However, as you just said in your presentation as well, and as you know, narratives tend to matter more than facts. And genocide deniers are rarely being dismissed, you just said it, in the public sphere. And for instance, I will take an example from your book. You described in details the manipulation around the Bruguière investigation in chapter 7 of your book, titled Master Plot. The Bruguière report has officially been debunked. It's something that is known, but its legacy is here to stay, and it is still being considered and referenced. So I would like to discuss with you, why is Rwanda losing the ground when it comes to the narrative war?
I think, unfortunately, the denial campaign coincided with a growth in social media. I think that has played a huge part. Also, we are in what someone called yesterday a post-truth era. I don't think it will last, but we are definitely in a post-truth era. You know, it's not just the genocide against the Tutsi that is distorted. It is other things as well, other events as well suffer this. But in the case of Rwanda, it is particularly pernicious because a movement has grown up to use this distorted history to try to attack the government here, and that is its danger. I do believe, I've just said it, that there are different rules when reporting Rwanda to when reporting takes place in the West. You can say almost anything you like. We've seen that with no fact-checking. Books are now produced that are not properly prepared. There is no proper background investigation or research. You know, when reporting the assassination of Habyarimana, it would be rather like reporting the assassination of President Kennedy and ignoring all the scientific reports, all the witnesses, and just taking two people who have an alternative view for their own ends and reporting what they're saying as fact. I mean, it is absolutely ludicrous. And time will tell. Mm-hmm. It is a matter of time. And I do think that in the end, those facts that are established will win out. Truth can pass through fire and not get burned, I think. This is I have heard this many times.
Yeah, thank you so much. And in the same line, in chapter 9 of your book titled Decoding, the chapter presents several actors of denial who are still active today, and one of them is Paul Rusesabagina, whose fictional movie Hotel Rwanda is now used to attack the country, to attack Rwanda. So you may have seen the tweets by the actors from the Avengers yesterday, in the past days. So I just wanted to see with you, in the very same line of the narratives, how is the genocide denial reaching such spheres where it was until now taken out of?
I think one of the key chapters in the book is called Decoding, and it has a scene where Paul Rusesabagina speaks to an American audience of students. And his speech is denial. And yet the students are not equipped to be able to ascertain that. I am absolutely astonished that the facts of this case are just so completely ignored. You know, I interviewed, UN peacekeepers, military observers, who were at the Hotel des Mille Collines. The consensus is that Paul Rusesabagina, his role in that hotel was as the eyes and ears of Hutu power, that the people in the hotel had visas and had to be saved because the whole world was watching the Hotel des Mille Collines, whereas 5 minutes down the road, there was no such attention for those families at Sainte-Famille. In 2008, Paul Rusesabagina came to London and appeared in a Westminster Magistrates' Court to give evidence to try to prevent the extradition of 5 alleged genocidaires who are still at large in the UK. And the magistrate determined that he was no more than a proponent of Hutu power, that by his testimony, you could tell that this man was a Hutu power ideologue. I wrote this in my book. These are the facts of the case. Mm-hmm. And when Hollywood decided to continue in the face of all these known facts to support him, I wrote letters. I wrote to CNN. I wrote to The Guardian. I wrote to Channel 4 News. And the facts just did not seem to matter to them. This is extraordinary to me. I'm an old-fashioned journalist. I learnt my trade on the Sunday Times newspaper. And to see journalists dismiss facts in this way is quite extraordinary.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Yeah, and another point I wanted to engage you on is about the importance of vocabulary. You've said it. The UN has recognized the official denomination of the genocide against the Tutsi. And as you said it in your presentation, so many countries in the Western world are refusing to use it. And I wanted to engage you around the why of that. So what is their excuse? And more specifically, could the UN do something about it? As you debrief that, also, you could maybe tell us more about the dynamics of the genocide denial in the UK.
Well, the 2 states that refuse to recognize the designation genocide against the Tutsi are the US and the UK, for reasons best known only to themselves. I cannot understand it. They talk of other victims, but they fail to recognize the Genocide Convention. The other victims did not die in a genocide. The Tutsi died in a genocide. The other victims died because they were in the way or they stood up against the Hutu power ideologues. So why on earth the UK and the US is resisting this is anybody's guess, and there's a lot of research to do, I think, to find out. But it is to our shame. There is a tsunami of denial in the UK currently. Nothing could have prepared me for the book by Michaela Wrong. I'm sure you know of it here. Yeah. It is replete with error and denial, and yet received reviews widely in the British press. I don't think this stage of this history will last. I think that eventually the truth will out, as I said previously.
Mm-hmm. Great. And one last point I would like to converse about with you is, you have said and you continue saying that facts are the best way to fight denial, and that we should not speak with deniers. So facts are available. Nothing is hidden. We know that, but deniers are thriving. What do you think should be done by the government of Rwanda and Rwandans at large, and especially survivors' organizations? And as we debrief that, I wanted also to look at particularly there is a new Rwandan High Commissioner in London, and a new British High Commissioner recently arrived in Kigali. So I wanted to see with you, what can they do to improve the Rwanda-UK relations with regards to this specific question of genocide denial?
Well, first of all, I hope they read my book. I hope that they take the time to actually study and understand that in refusing to recognize the designation, they contribute to the campaign of denial. There's no doubt that they are contributing to the campaign of denial. And they should know, and they should be told. It should be made quite clear. I'm also encouraged by the numbers now of survivor testimonies. I've said this before, that survivor testimonies will destroy the lies and the denial. It's very, very important that much is recorded, that archives are preserved. And you know that research continues. There's an awful lot more still to do. And I intend to carry on with my work, yes. I would also like to thank you all for the launch of this book. It means a great deal to me. Thank you. I would also like to thank the people in Rwanda who over the course of 28 years have helped and informed my work, responding to sometimes unreasonable requests for help at crucial moments, and for your insights, for your memories, and for your wisdom during many long and detailed interviews. It has been a privilege to know you and this remarkable country that has risen so spectacularly from the ashes. I would also like to acknowledge the great honor accorded to me by His Excellency Paul Kagame, who gave authorization all those years ago to allow me to consult the numerous and precious collection of state archives here in Rwanda. This was unprecedented in my journalistic experience anywhere in the world. And I could not have written these 3 books without you, and this has been the privilege of my life. And finally, I would like to thank you all for your generous, kind and warm hospitality over these many, many years. Murakoze cyane.